What makes someone turn bad? How do we understand radicalism or extremism? Why do some people seem to have more of a moral compass than others? And where does that morality even come from? Why do certain people choose evil and others strive to be good? But wait, can anyone be good? What even is good? Okay, that's a lot. But we're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. I am Sarah Stone. I'm the Outreach Director for Young Adults at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church here in Houston. And I'm going to introduce our guest in just a second, but Theology on Air, as many of you know, is born out of a ministry called Theology on Tap, where a bunch of young adults in Houston get together to drink craft beer and talk about theology and philosophy and faith and culture and just interesting things like that. And then in the podcast, we get to go even deeper into some of those ideas. And we're going to be doing that today. I'm pretty excited. But a little bit of housekeeping. Check us out on whatever podcast platform you use to listen to this. Rate us, review us. I would say subscribe, but I think the new, at least on Apple phones, it's not called subscribe anymore. It's called follow. But whatever you need to do to see more of us, we would love that because we want to grow and be able to have more people engage us. And then, of course, check out everything you need to know about Theology on Tap on HoustonTOT.com, including upcoming events. And I'm not sure when this episode will air, but I believe it's going to air before our next live event, which is August 10th. And we're going to be talking about evangelicals. So that should be pretty interesting. But for today, we're going to be talking about everything from philosophy to counterterrorism that has to do with kind of morality, what makes people good or bad or turn bad, and all of that kind of jazz. And I have just realized mid-recording that I never got your bio. So I'm going to make you introduce yourself.
Oh, okay.
But our guest on Zoom is Richard Suttles, who has been watching us for a while and engaging us, and we finally have the opportunity to have him on. But he works in counterterrorism for the U.S. government. His postgrad degrees from the University of Oklahoma, and his expertise and his focus is on tribalism and radicalization. And he has a Facebook page called, which is very clever, The Faithiest Atheist. And I'm sure he will explain a little bit about how that really defines him as a person. But Taylor, give us your quick bio, and it cannot include the words multiverse or sayer of truth.
Man. Well, so now I have to think on the fly.
Yeah.
No, I just figured you would use any of the 6 bios that I've sent before, but
they all say Lord of the
that's
Multiverse,
true, they do.
sayer of truth.
No, my name is Taylor Neal. I went to Baylor University. Actually, while at that Baptist university, I fell away from faith. Ended up coming back to faith through the study of apologetics, which is really just looking at the reasons and evidence for the core truth claims of Christianity. And through that process, just came to believe that it was more likely true than not. And then began living as a Christian. That was about 10 years ago. And so that's when my life changed, as after the decision to live as a Christian. And so I'm still at it 10 years later, still obsessed with the philosophy aspect of it. And now actually I'm at HBU pursuing a master's degree in the subject. And I'm working for an organization called Search Ministries that helps people work through these questions.
Yeah. And he has a beautiful wife named Melissa and 3 lovely children. That. And he lives far away on a farm, a beautiful farm that's way too far away from us. But so I'm thinking that we put this together today. It's not quite a debate. It's a conversation, but you'll learn as you listen that Richard and Taylor fall in sort of different places spiritually, and yet they're kind of both fascinated by ideas around morality. And so I got this idea to put them together and let them nerd out for all of you. But why don't we just start by talking a little bit about your own, I mean, you started to say this, but your own stories of faith, or maybe not so much faith. What worldview you've landed on, why you landed there, what helped shape that. And of course, as you're telling us that story, Richard, I'm going to ask you to start. How did questions around morality kind of play a role in that? So just give us kind of the picture of who Richard is, especially when it comes to in terms of spiritual and moral things.
Okay, yeah, sure. I was raised Southern Baptist in Georgia by a really good community church. In fact, that church still treats me, even though I'm in Arizona now, they still treat me like family and my family like family. So it's a really good church. I'm still friends with my youth group. Those who are still Christians and those who still aren't, we're still all friends. That's probably due to Facebook more than anything, but we all still stay in touch. So that that upbringing was good. I think what made me start to fall away was starting to suspect that everyone had different answers for hard questions.
What? Which is what I've never heard of that.
Which is what I think now. I think people come up with answers that work for them, and then they just kind of go with that. And then, some people change and some people don't. But my church was really helpful in answering questions, but then they didn't like to talk about the part that it seemed like they had different answers than each other. In fact, my youth group minister gave me my first apologetics book, which was Scaling the Secular City. And this was back in 1987. And back then, J.P. Moreland was like the William Lane Craig. And William Lane Craig, was still a thing in 1987, but he wasn't huge yet. And so like Scaling the Secular City reads like what William Lane Craig would write about now. So those kind of classic apologetics defenses. But what the youth minister didn't know was that what J.P. Moreland had said was entirely different than what they had all told me. And so then that bothered them. Yeah. And then I started to think, well, it's possible that you can just be really smart and really philosophical, and then just come up with something that really works. Or you can go with what you were told and then believe in that. And so we all just kind of do it to ourselves, which was kind of where I started to walk away from religion. And then I did go through a phase of being an atheist where I would say, well, I believe in reason and I don't believe in fake stories. So I went through a phase of that too, but even that didn't work because I realized that many of my fellow atheists also behave sometimes like zealots and sometimes like they're, really certain of things that they can't show, but, how dare you bring that up? And then in my work in counterterrorism, in the last 25, 26 years, that made me come to see that this is just a human thing. I think humans can be where they come up with worldviews. Their worldviews are basically based on epistemology and morality. Those are the two big platforms. And they come up with a worldview, and it can be religious, it can be political, it can be sports, and it can be anti-religion, but it's something with morality and epistemology. And maybe we can't demonstrate ours to each other, but we can usually demonstrate ours to people who agree with us. And I think that's just a human thing. So,
and we'll get into some defining terms a little bit for sure, because that word epistemology, apologists love to throw that around. It's not a word that most people use. But before we do that, just you call yourself the faithiest atheist. So I have to ask, what does that mean? I mean, I know a lot of atheists that really don't want to put the word faith in their little moniker. So.
Right. So I was thinking about starting a page a few years ago, but I couldn't think of something that was cute. And I was going to put the weak atheist because I'm not the kind of atheist that says, this has to be this way and stop making up stories. I couldn't do that. So I was like, what's cute that goes with atheist? And then one day Faithiest came to me. And then later after I started it, another apologist told me that there was another atheist that had made a book called Faiththeism. Someone had thought about that before, but I had already started the Faithiest Atheist. So
I'm always disappointed when that happens, when I think that I came up with something
original,
and then find out. Yeah.
So you're not a man of faith per se, but you are not a militant atheist that's going to go around telling people they're stupid for believing in such things. Is that kind of
right
where you stand?
Yeah. Something that Pastor Tim Keller has said is that none of us can, demonstrate every single thing that we believe. So I think we all have some degree of faith. And I think, and I'm using the word faith that the way that Frank Turek and Norm Geisler used it, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Back then they said there's knowledge and then there's faith, and faith covers a gap in knowledge. I realize now that Frank Turek will sometimes say that faith is like after you do all the science, you trust your observations. But back then in like 2004 or whatever, they would say it's different than knowledge. And so I think that we all have that. So I'm just embracing that I have that too.
I love that. I think that's great. Okay. So Taylor, give us and I feel like when we talked about this ahead of time, you both had dinosaurs in your story. So maybe you'll have to go back and tell about the dinosaur part, but
sure.
Right.
Taylor, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you did a little bit in the intro, but flesh that out a little more for us.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say I'm honored to be in conversation with you today, Richard, and I appreciate your service to our country. I know I can't say too much about it because this is highly secretive stuff. Not
when you
really
say
the
it's
kind
highly
of
secretive, I think you break the
I know
rules.
he gave me permission.
And
We'll bleep that part out.
The fact that I was in the Marines and that I work for the U.S. government, and that's not a secret.
Yeah.
What you? All that other stuff we know.
Taylor's right, is what I heard.
Oh my gosh.
No, but one of the other things that I've really enjoyed about chatting with you a little bit already is I find out that we have some commonality, not just in our stories, but kind of in our thinking as well. And, you had said that it was a problem for you that so many people that were in positions of authority seemed to disagree on important questions. And I had that problem too. I think for me, the difference was I said, well, one of them's got to be right. And so I'm going to stay after this until I figure out which one of them is correct. And so that's been the way that I've come to a lot of my conclusions. But circling back to the way I was brought up, I came up in a small Texas town where, one of the great things about small towns is that everybody knows everybody else's business. It's a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
The ways in which it's good is it builds community. The ways in which it's bad is that everybody knows your business. Right. And so church, when I was a kid, really felt like a little bit of a social scene. And there was something kind of off-putting about that. And then when you combine that with the, size and location of your home, that helps to start determine your status in town. Right. And so there's a superficiality there that was kind of repellent to me. And then also I asked a ton of questions. I've always been this way. Now I have a son who's like a carbon copy of me, and he's this way, just always asking questions because everything has to fit together and make sense in my worldview. So I found that most of the time people kind of liked that I asked so many questions. But at church, I got a very different kind of a response. People didn't like it as much at church. And I always seem to get two kinds of answers to my questions, either really bad or really concerned. And, it was that second.
He's not a Christian anymore.
Yeah. Why are you really having these questions? How's your faith?
Exactly.
And those were the more damaging type of questions. I know, Richard, you had that experience also.
Yeah.
And so, eventually after doing this for a while, you come away with the impression that I'm not getting satisfying answers because there aren't any. And so I think that subconsciously I kind of took that on early, and that might have been what preceded my loss of faith in college. But ultimately, as I said, I came back through the study of apologetics, just believing that it was actually true. And we can talk about why in a little bit, but morality had a big role to play in that process for me. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I became convinced that if God didn't exist, then we didn't have an adequate foundation or standard for objective categories of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And so when I kind of felt like the choice before me was I can have my moral sense that, some things are truly evil and some things are truly good, or, I could have my intellectual integrity as I looked at it at that time. I was like, well, then God exists. If that's my choice, then God exists. So that's kind of how I got here.
Maybe Richard, talk us through a little bit, and both of you can kind of answer
the dinosaurs.
This.
I didn't mention the dinosaurs.
Oh, neither of you. Okay, guys, later you can ask us questions about the dinosaurs, and maybe they'll both give you their own answers about the dinosaurs and what happened.
It's the same thing. But back in the 70s and 80s, there were some evangelicals who would say that Satan planted dinosaur bones to trick us and to stay away from science, which wasn't the original Christian science narrative, but it was a narrative that took off. I mean, it was, here I am, and I was in Georgia and Taylor was in Texas. It was a narrative that people heard. So it wasn't just new atheists being mean, coming up with weird things. They took it from those evangelicals and said, this sounds weird.
So wait, is that what they told you too? That Satan hid them?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't remember.
It was a Sunday school teacher, and bless his heart, he wasn't like somebody that went to seminary. He was one of the other kids' dads or something, right? But either way, when you're like 7 years old, this is devastating information. Like I'm a 7-year-old boy, and I love
dinosaurs, but Satan's involved. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Jurassic Park was the biggest movie in the world at the time, and I just loved dinosaurs, and so that they were a scheme of the devil was just very, very upsetting to me. So I was grateful to find out that wasn't true.
Yeah, I think I can unequivocally speak for all of Theology on Tap leadership that is not what we believe.
Right.
Satan did not hide dinosaur bones. There's not a lot of things I can say that we all agree on, but I think we all agree on that. It was probably one of his minions. He wouldn't be the one to do it.
No, he wouldn't do it himself.
No, I'm kidding. Okay, so this idea of morality, we're going to have to define some terms. Both of you are interested in morality for different reasons, maybe, but what does it have to do with our well-being? What is it? How does it work? I mean, Richard, I'll let you kind of go first because Taylor said something like there had to be this kind of standard for good and evil that for him was enough evidence to point to God. Talk us through how you think of morality, maybe, and what does it have to do with our well-being?
Okay, yes, and that was similar to what happened with C.S. Lewis. That same thing.
Yes.
And in fact, many people convert back into religion or change religions, but accept some sort of theist thing. Even Jordan Peterson, at some point, his Descartes baseline was that there's atrocities that we all agree are atrocities, so that must mean something.
He's flirting with us.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, he is.
I think he's inches away. We'll see.
We can talk about that too, about that, but because that ties into what I'm going to say. What I want to say is that, we said epistemology and the word epistemic, which I'll use a lot. It's all, from what I've found in my studies and my work, it's all epistemology and morality. So epistemology is what you think. It's like Taylor said, what's the objective good and bad for morality? We also perceive an objective category for what's correct or incorrect. And those two things work together. And everybody has a worldview where they say some things are absolutely right and wrong. Some things are absolutely correct or incorrect. And when you go on a journey, you can be a new atheist, or you can be of any religion, or you can be apathetic to religion, or you can be thinking about politics, but you're thinking some things are absolutely correct or incorrect. Some things are absolutely wrong or right. Everybody has that. I will say that in many cultures, a lot of people's worldview is to stay out of it. So they won't talk about epistemology or morality. They'll just say, leave me alone. I'm going to work. I'm taking care of my family. Don't come talk to me about these weird things that people argue about. So a lot of people's worldview is stay out of it. So that their view is the epistemic and the moral foundation is leave me alone. I'm good. But then people like us, like Taylor and me, will say, no, I want to know, is it based on God? Is it based on chemicals? What's it based on? So we all do that. And then some people are more aware of it and celebrate it than others, but we all do that based on those two categories. And I'll also say they become the same thing. When you do this long enough, then you start to see morality and epistemology is the exact same thing. It's all. Let
me pause you for a second, because you kind of defined it, but it was so parenthetical. I want to make sure our listeners understand. Epistemology is basically just like how we know things, right? I mean, like how you go about deciding what is correct and incorrect, true, not true. Is that kind of a fair statement?
Yeah, it's a theory of knowledge. So how we know what we know. That's right.
Okay, got it.
And then when you get really good at it, you'll say, not only that, you have a moral duty to know what's objectively correct or incorrect, and you have an epistemic duty to know what's morally right or wrong.
Yeah.
So, and then it's all the same thing. And, and that's, the first people that I encountered in my study on radicalization and terrorism were people who were justifying terrorism. And that mindset was the first group of people that I realized that epistemology and morality were everything to them. They weren't just thinking, oh, I'm angry, I'm just going to lash out. There was a reason why they were angry, and there was a very specific reason as to why they were lashing out and the way they were lashing out. But then later I realized our policymakers do the same thing. And then I realized the audiences to policymakers and audiences to terrorism do the same thing. And Christians, atheists, then I realized it's just all of us. And that's where my academic studies really kicked in. But when it comes to morality and our well-being, my theory is that we have three moral systems inside of us. Every person has three moral systems. And the first one is self-interest. So it's not like good versus evil. It's these three systems that are all sometimes work together and sometimes are at odds. But you have the self-interest wiring. Then you have cooperative wiring, where you're working for the well-being of something else, and that something else is working for the well-being of you. And that's cooperation wiring. And then we have zealotry wiring. And this zealotry wiring, when I say zealotry, and I think this is the last word I'm going to have to define, but when I say zealotry, someone who's really zealous about something, they'll say there's this idea or this concept, or it could be a person, that is above my own individual well-being, that the well-being of this thing is more important than my individual well-being. And not only that, I think that everyone should agree that that's the truth, that the well-being of this must endure even over me. In fact, I'll be willing to sacrifice my own well-being, and you should be willing to sacrifice your well-being in the interest of enduring this thing, whatever this thing is.
Can I interrupt you for a second to ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So these sort of moral systems you're talking about, self-interest, cooperative, zealotry, do people sometimes have multiple? I mean, because I can think of things that I'm zealous about, but also I want to cooperate to achieve that. And does that work like that? Like, am I getting ahead of you?
Yeah. When you have the zealotry wiring, there's some stuff that's probably already there when you're born. Like, I want my family to be okay. I really care about the well-being of my mom. That could already be there. But I'm going to argue that I think there's some blankness, there's some blank space, so that you have the wiring where chemicals or some part of your neurology is saying, and you're too young to know any better. In fact, I can use like the analogy of a songbird to talk about this. It's like a songbird is born to sing a song, but when they're really little, they don't think about songs. They're thinking about eating and doing what their mom says and being with their mom. But there's some sort of wiring that says you're going to sing a song. And then later in life, the other songbirds will teach him that song in the community. And then he's already wired to start singing that song. So I think we're born into conditions where we have a blank that says this is going to be really, really important, and you better dedicate your life to this. But it's blank. So that's why someone can be born into an Islamic community and then suddenly realize that Islam is the truth, and Hindu and Shinto. And I'm not saying that to say that, everything's fake, that all of it must be fake. I'm just saying that that's why I think people are born into different religions. Or if you're born into a home where your parents think that religion is evil, you're going to think it's really important that we eliminate religion so that we can all start reasoning adequately. You're going to think that's more important. That's going to become your thing. And I think that explains a lot of new atheism and why they behave a lot like zealots, is because they think it's so important that we eliminate religion that I'm willing to say and do things that seem cruel and seem harsh and maybe even evil. But it's all in the interest of securing this one big ideal that we have to achieve. And I don't mean to say that zealotry is evil, because what if your zealotry is to treat all humans as if they have value? What if that's your thing? Or what if it's one of your things? So zealotry can be great. And there's I bought some of my books. One is called The Secret of Our Success by a scientist named Joseph Henrich. I don't know if I have that one with me.
We trust you that it's a real book that exists, though.
Yes, here it is. The Secret of Our Success.
Okay.
He says this is why humans are still here, is because of that zealotry wiring. Is that when you're a group and you're behaving like one thing is more important than everything else, the cooperation that you'll put into your group will help you outcompete other groups. And so that's why some humans can endure really, really horrific conditions and do better than other groups, because they all believe in this one thing. And they do better because of it. So he says those are our ancestors, and because people did that, and they did better than all the other hominins out there, we're now the descendants of them. So we have that wiring inside of us.
I'm going to pause you because I feel like I can feel the gears in Taylor's head turning and all the ways that he might want to respond. I know you have so much more to share, and I am fascinated about this just from a counterterrorism perspective. I want to make sure I'm not a terrorist, but we'll get to that at the end. So Taylor, as you hear him talk, just respond to some of what you've heard him say. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree?
Well, there's a lot there, and I agreed with a lot of it. One thing that I would want to point out, as much as I love epistemology, we've been talking a lot about that, hope to do that more. As it pertains to morality, though, I'm actually more interested in the ontological question.
Oh, here's another big word.
Ontology is just what is real, right? If epistemology is how do we know what's real, ontology is what actually corresponds to reality. And so there might
truth?
be, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So there might be a variety of ways that people come to their different moral beliefs. They have different epistemic processes. But if there is such a thing as morality out there, if it really exists, then we don't create it through whatever kind of epistemic process we go through. We discover it. And
Right.
so what I'm wanting to know is morality an objective feature of reality, or is it just a story that has, usefulness, has utility for us because it helps us survive as a species? It helps us build a community, which is important for us as social animals. So that's really what I'm driving at. And one thing I definitely agreed with is Richard's right, I think, when he says that everybody just kind of presupposes some form of moral realism, which is just the idea that morality is a feature of reality, that it's not just made up. So all cultures have different ways of looking at it, different ways of coming to their beliefs, but they all have this shared instinct that morality actually exists as
Yes,
part of
yeah.
the world.
I absolutely agree with that. We all do it, and maybe not sociopaths, but except for them, we all have that.
Right.
And we agree that that's a problem, which is part of the agreement that, yeah.
And I also think sociopaths are kind of a case that's an exception that proves the rule.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
The fact that it's missing lets us know something's wrong.
Something's off.
Yeah, plenty of atheist scientists say the exact same thing. Is because of them, we do feel like there's a real moral
yes,
right and wrong. Yeah.
Yes. One thing that I'm not sure if I disagreed with, but I would just want to parse out a little bit. You were talking about people being born into kind of a Muslim family, or people coming up in an atheist household. Obviously, that's going to have a huge impact on their perspective and worldview. But I don't think it's determinative of
It's not,
their worldview.
It's not determinative.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's just heavy influence.
Right. And then I think it was a helpful clarification when you said also that doesn't mean that the belief is wrong. Right. Just because, we were raised in Christian households, you're no longer a Christian. I became a Christian again. That has nothing to do with whether or not it's true, which I think we both would agree with.
Right. That would be the ontology again. If it's ontologically the case that Christianity is true, then it doesn't really matter how people came to believe it or didn't believe it.
Right. Right. And so I think one of the reasons why moral realism is just presupposed by almost all discussion of morality in our world is that it's kind of impossible for us to live happily and consistently with the commitment to the idea that morality doesn't exist.
Right.
Just think about what that takes away from you. I mean, how is anyone morally culpable for anything? And so how is anything morally praiseworthy? That runs into absurdities like, is it better to kill a baby or love a baby? Well, you can't really provide an answer. You just have to say it's a nonsense question if you deny realism.
But is there anyone that denies it, or do we argue about whence it came?
There are people that deny it. There's a good number of people that kind of recognize the problem that I'm going to touch on next, and so they deny realism. However, that's why I say they live either happily or inconsistently, or consistently, but not both. Yeah. So if they're consistent, this worldview is so bleak and depressing that, I mean, you can actually see the effect that it has on people when it's been studied. But most people that deny the existence of objective moral facts live as if there is objective moral facts. And so that's why I say it's inconsistent.
They don't go around murdering people.
Right. Yeah. Right. So if we kind of come at this from the shared agreement, morality is real. I'm not making any claims about which moral facts I know and what's right and wrong to do in a particular situation. But if we come at it from that there is a right way to act, then I think it has really significant theological implications. And that's kind of, Richard mentioned C.S. Lewis. This was the thing that eventually drove him to faith, was that
straight and crooked line thing.
Yes. Yeah. How did he know that a line was crooked unless he had some idea of a straight line, which told him that there was a way that the world ought to be and that the world isn't that way. But if that's true, then there's a standard beyond human opinion that defines what that right way is. And for him, it could only be a personal agent. And I think he had that right.
What is just a quick response to that argument? I mean, that's a pretty standard apologetic argument, right? There has to be a standard by which we know what's wrong. Therefore, there has to be something like a transcendent being. How do you respond to that?
I'll answer that and also respond to the ontology thing, because I absolutely agree. There's ontologically what's true, and then there's epistemically what we perceive to be true. What I'm going to argue is that part of our epistemic and moral framework, when you get really good at it, is to deny that you're analyzing anymore and to say, I'm no longer thinking about what's right or wrong. I now know it. I've discovered it. And this is the ontological truth. So we're not talking about epistemology anymore. We're now talking about the ontological truth. And my argument is that I think that might just be a perception that we might, and this could be just as the case for an atheist or an Islamic scholar or a Christian apologist, that they've gotten so good at the epistemology and morality thing that they're saying, I'm not thinking anymore. Now this is ontologically true. So I think that certainty that we all experience could be what makes C.S. Lewis or Jordan Peterson or Taylor all say, at this point, I'm not thinking about it, because part of this moral zealotry, the zealotry framework uses morality. And part of us knowing that an atrocity is absolutely wrong is that we don't think about it. You tell somebody something horrible and they immediately recoil before they even think about it. They're just like, oh my God, that's horrible. And so what's this about? What's this jumping? And then you realizing you jumped before you even thought about it. And I'm going to say that could be chemicals. That could be part of that wiring that I'm talking about that makes you jump and think back. Rather than, it could be the ontological truth. So I'm not denying that there's no ontological morality, and I'm certainly not denying there's no ontological truth. I'm just saying that part of our epistemology and moral framework is to perceive an ontological truth and then to be committed to it. And that commitment is part of how we live our life. And it's like Taylor said, when you start living like a Christian, like Jordan Peterson does, it changes your life. And it will change your life if you, depending on what kind of Christian, because I think people can take a label and do what they want with it. But depending on how you do it, but if you live like Taylor does or Jordan Peterson, it will absolutely change your life.
You don't know how Taylor lives. I'll talk to you later. No. Yeah. Taylor, did you want to push back?
We were talking about inconsistencies. Yes, I did. Jog my memory. Right at the beginning where you started talking there, Richard, remind me that line that you were on, because I wanted to respond to it.
He was responding to my asking about the C.S. Lewis idea, that apologetic about.
And I'm saying it's absolutely a perception. We absolutely do perceive a moral, ontological right and wrong. I'm just saying that might be more about this biological zealotry system, rather than an actual ontological truth.
Right. And so here's the thing about that. And thank you, because I remember now. I actually agree with that. But I don't think we have to stop there. I think that actually I can provide good reasons why I'm rational to accept this moral intuition, is what I'm going to call it. Because I went down this rabbit hole a good bit when I first kind of discovered this argument, because I'm a skeptical guy by nature. And so I really wanted to pursue this. And what I ultimately ended up at was, I'm not even sure that I exist when I get down to it. I could be a brain in a vat, right? I could be hooked up to one of those farms in the Matrix, and there would be no way for me to know it, because I can't get outside of my sense experience. Right. But I do have a sense experience of a external world of physical objects. Right. And simultaneously, I have no equally good reason to doubt that these physical objects exist. And so I think I'm rational to accept that those experiences of the external world are veridical and that my senses are reliable. I think the same thing is true about morality. I have a moral sense. There is a universal human moral sense that there is this realm of objective moral facts. And I don't have an equally compelling reason to deny that morality is real, and that it corresponds to reality in a meaningful way. And so I think I'm rational to accept that morality is real, the external world is real, in a way that I wouldn't be rational to accept the alternative. And so then I'm back to, I've got to deal with the implications of this.
And that it could be very well your perception and true.
Correct.
Right. They're not
Yes.
mutually exclusive.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm arguing that we all perceive ontological truth once we go down this rabbit hole. And then I'm saying, you're right. There could be an actual ontological truth outside of all that. Your Descartes moment and my Descartes moment are exactly the same.
You think you're a brain in a vat too, or you have a demon,
No, but I got to that point, like, what do I know? And like, as we all probably, and the viewers all know, Descartes is the one who said, I think, therefore I am. And that was his moment. That was his baseline. And Jordan Peterson's was, we all recoil at atrocities. So that must mean there's a moral right and wrong. My Descartes moment was what you just said. Here it is. It's if you're on a train track and a train is coming, move.
Yes.
That's what
you believe it.
That I got rid of my, quandary, and I was able to, that changed my life.
Yes.
So maybe there's not really a train, maybe there's not really a train track, but I'm not going to be there to find out, because it seems like people who don't do that aren't here to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. At a gut level, you believe that your experience is veridical.
Right. So, and now that still could be that we're all fooling ourselves.
Yes.
And my argument is that we are, but I also say, as we're fooling ourselves, pick one that keeps you off those train tracks. And so
that's what Taylor says too.
Yeah. Right.
Let's talk about the spiritual element of that.
Well, I'm curious, because we think a lot alike on this issue. And so I guess what one point of possible difference is that I say, not only am I rational, but I think I'm more rational to accept that all of these things are real than the alternative. And then I start to deal with the implications, which I think are necessarily theological. Do you agree with that?
Here's what I think that might be troubling, and it troubles me too. I think as we do our epistemic and moral framework, our sense of what is rational is different. So that there's a equivalent of Taylor in Islam, and an equivalent Taylor for atheism, and an equivalent Taylor for Hindu. Obviously, they can't all be correct, but they can all make this a really robust 6,000 book, consistent and coherent argument that will definitely not only appear rational, but will appear inspirational to people who agree with them, and might even convert other people. They might, somebody who hasn't thought about it. And like I said, a lot of us just choose not to think about it. So that's our audience. People who don't think about it and say, leave me alone. And then they find this book from Taylor, and then they read it and they're like, man, he's covered every single base. Taylor's got it. I'm gonna start agreeing with Taylor. And then their epistemic and moral framework changes because they've been converted. So conversion is a huge part of our existence. But the way we perceive rationality is different from each other. So what appears rational to one person won't appear rational. And the thing is, you can so easily, you read one of these 6,000 page books from an Islamic scholar, some of which work for the Saudi Arabian government. You read one of their 6,000 page books, and you can just see flaw after flaw after flaw. But try telling that to somebody who thinks that they're talking to God, and they'll, immediately hate you. They'll call you into question. They'll lash out at you because you violated their epistemic and moral system. And this is where I'm saying our meaning comes from. So our perception of meaning is from that. And when you mess with someone's meaning system, they're going to lash out, or at least they're going to have the tendency to want to lash out. And perceive you as missing. Think about it. If you think about someone who really has an opposing worldview, the first thing you think of is that they're missing something intellectually, or they're missing something morally, or both at best. Right. Not that they're necessarily evil or stupid, but best case scenario, they haven't put the work in for them not to see it. But William Lane Craig,
let me jump in as a not as smart as either of you lay person, because you said something a couple minutes ago about the sort of atheist version of Taylor or the Islamic version of Taylor, but they can't all be right. So like, for instance, just to simplify things, there either is a God or there isn't a God. Both things can't be true. We kind of all agree about that.
Right.
Okay. So, I mean, if all three of us read a book that had something absurd in it, we could all point that out, despite the fact that there are Christians and non-Christians among the three of us. So isn't there some sort of appeal to like the intellect that A very smart Islamic person, a very smart Christian.
Well, and
I mean, maybe better than smart.
I think possibly if I understand correctly, the line that Richard is on here is that how do we know, and how do we know that our past experiences and intellectual commitments have not clouded our thinking on this issue? And I think there's something to that, but I agree with you, Sarah, that the truth is out there and it is knowable. And I mean, we do see people deconvert from Christianity and convert to other faiths, and then vice versa. So we can kind of break out of that lest we commit the genetic fallacy, which I think we talked about already. Right.
So then let's talk a little bit about changing your mind, because I would like to think that if I read a book about my own worldview, a Christian book, and it said something ridiculous in it, like the devil hid dinosaur bones, that I hope that I'm thoughtful enough and I hold things lightly enough because I'm pursuing truth. I mean, I realize everybody thinks that, but that I could look at that and say, that doesn't seem to square with reality. So talk a little bit about the way that both of you with your different worldviews view the idea of somebody changing their mind. Yeah. Because that's kind of where we started by talking about how do people like turn evil or turn bad. And I think a change of mind has to do with that.
Yeah,
right?
no,
it does. I definitely want to get into what would make somebody do something evil. We can do that towards the end, but did you want to answer first, Taylor, that question?
Sure. I can be really brief on this. I mean, I think I've changed my mind twice in my life about this really, really most important question. And I do find now that I have intellectual commitments that I'm subject to confirmation bias like anybody else is. If I'm really honest, that's a big factor that I have to protect against. The only thing that I know to do about it is to try to steel man the best arguments against my own position and then see if it holds up.
I've like witnessed him do this in real time. Yeah. So he like makes the counter argument to make sure that he's.
I'm arguing with myself all the time. Yeah.
On the way home. That's what I was talking about. People who get really good at this. This is what you do all day. So I'm doing chores around the house and I'm thinking, what if I was wrong? What would that look like?
Yes.
That comes from Tim McGrew, by the way. If you've ever had Tim McGrew on your page, that's his.
No, but Tim McGrew, if you're listening, we'd like to have you on.
He said, if you were wrong, what would it look like? You should always be passionately considering what would it look like if you were wrong.
Well,
he's a Baylor guy, but
really comes in handy for me. Go ahead.
McGrew's a Baylor guy, but I don't think I have that much pull at the university. I wasn't the best student, so
that's funny.
In terms of changing your mind, I think that something would have to hit your epistemic or moral standards, and they become precious to you. When you really go down this journey, they become precious to you, and something would have to violate it that you see it. So like, I know a guy who used to think that nobody on the right ever did cancel culture. And even if someone would show him posts where he did it, he would say, you don't understand, that's not cancel culture. But what changed his mind was he found an old post of his on a web board, and he didn't realize it was him yet. He just read the words.
Oh, that's great.
This was back in 2003, and it was about the Dixie Chicks. And he wrote,
you mean the Chicks?
Yeah, the Chicks, right. And he wrote, these people are monsters. And all they said was they were embarrassed of George Bush. He was like, these people are monsters. They don't deserve to have a job. They need to be, homeless. And so they need to learn a lesson. And he read that and he was like, cancel culture left. And then he saw it was him. And then he went back and looked at some of his other posts and saw he did the same thing to, I don't know if it's Peter Jennings. It's not Peter Jennings, Brian Williams. He kept doing it, but he had thought of it as a righteous thing. He's like, I'm not being cancel culture. I'm correcting wrongness.
I'm pointing to truth, right?
Yeah. And then he was like, purity, man, that's what I'm saying that the left does. So you can discover that there's something standard. There's something that breaks what you think is precious, and it can really change who you are. And so I think that happens all the time.
Do you think that happens more to, you know what, never mind, that's going to take us on a rabbit trail. What do you think about, did you already say what you think about how people change their mind? I mean, you said you changed yours twice. Oh yes. Yeah. You're arguing with yourself.
And rationality, when I was talking about rationality and you talked about there are some things that are just true and not, like I like to imagine, like, what if a team of apologists and a team of ISIS scholars were out in a field and there was like a barrier to keep them, to keep ISIS from attacking them. And you could just talk about what do you agree with? The apologist could point up to the sky and say the sun exists, and the ISIS will be like, yeah, you're right. Obviously the sun exists. So there is a way to demonstrate ontological truths to each other that you don't have any epistemic battle over. But when you have an epistemic battle over something, it's really, really hard to demonstrate what's ontologically true. And in each case, the person who opposes is going to think that their opponent is missing something. They've failed in their duty to discover the truth, and they're just going to probably carry that to the grave. In some cases, they're probably going to carry that to the grave.
It's interesting thinking about the scenario you just posed. Makes me think that if we have sort of opposing viewpoints that can acknowledge things that we have in common, that there's something there that will help us get closer to the truth.
Right.
And I almost wonder if maybe one of the first things that needs to happen is not necessarily an acknowledgement of something external, like that the sun exists, but that maybe we have enough value as humans to allow each other to believe differently and talk about that. And maybe that's getting into some of what we're going to talk about. I know Taylor talks a lot about this idea that that's one of the draws for Christianity, is that there's a beginning value for human life, right? That we're made in God's image. And what would the world be like if Republicans and Democrats and Islamic extremists and crazy evangelicals could all come together and start there and say, okay, you seem to be a relatively smart person. You're made in God's image. You have value. I'm going to listen to what you have to say and actually consider holding my stuff loosely enough.
And I'll say that if your zealotry is really, really narrow and you're only keyed in on certain things, then you're going to see what you just said. You're going to see that as weakness. You're going to say, you're open-minded, which means you're vulnerable. But if
you must not really believe.
Yeah. But if your zealotry is an open-mindedness, and not only that, you have to be willing to take the hit. So as an atheist who doesn't immediately hate Christians and who follows many Christian channels, like, I'll read a Tim Keller book as soon as it comes out. Many of my atheists say, okay, so you're not really an atheist. You're just kind of, you're just kind of a weak Christian. That's fine. I say, I understand why you would think that.
But don't most people want to be proven wrong if they're wrong? Like, if I'm wrong about this, I want to know today, and I want to start sleeping in on Sundays. Mm-hmm. Truly. If it turns out Allah is the real God, I need to get on board and catch up on my 5 pillars, I'm serious.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of people perceive it that way. So you have someone who says, hey, if I'm wrong, you verify it right now, but there's not going to be any way to verify it because they've gone through, I'll take Stephen Meyer. There is never going to be a case and I guess everybody knows Stephen Meyer. And
everybody does not know.
He's a Christian biologist.
Yeah, Christian biologist, probably the smartest. You cannot give him a scientific thing that he hasn't thought into the ground. He will probably pass away believing that. There's nothing that any scientist can show him that he won't continue to think that ID is intelligent design is the answer. In fact, that was the most recent apologetics book that I just got finished, was the Return of the God Hypothesis. There's never going to ever be, and it could be because he's true. It could be because he's figured it all out, but he is so certain and he's got it all worked out. He's gone on the epistemic moral journey so intricately, more than, perhaps most people. He's never going to be dissuaded from that. And again, that's what this guy, Joseph Hendrick, said is the reason why we do so well, is because you come down on something, you commit to it, and then you start working harder and you might end up doing much better than other people. You might end up writing a best-selling book or 3, and then suddenly have a lot of friends and a huge network that want you to do well. And suddenly you're a lot better off than a lot of other people who haven't done that.
I know we're having fun talking about all this philosophical stuff, but I just looked at the time and it is flying by. So here's what I want to do. I want to just rapid fire ask you guys a couple questions. And then I want to get to this idea, what makes people turn bad, do evil, or is it really a turning? Maybe we start out that way. So maybe the first rapid fire question for both of you is, are people inherently good or bad? I realize that is a reductionist, simplistic question, but just for funsies, what do you say? What say you?
Well, it depends on what you mean by good or bad. I think that human beings have the capacity to do both because I believe that we're free creatures, but I do believe that we're moral agents and our actions have moral content. And from a Christian perspective, this is kind of exactly what you would expect. You would expect people with the capacity to choose wrong from time to time. But Christianity also has a very natural philosophical answer, which is kind of what I alluded to before, just that if the worldview is true, you would expect that these free creatures would have this, not just the capacity, but the sense of what they ought to do versus what they actually do.
So I'm not sure if I know the answer to the question then about, you think we have the ability to do good or to do bad, but do you think at our core, we more often than not choose, like, are we bent toward doing wrong, or are we bent toward doing right?
I think we are bent towards doing wrong.
Yeah,
I do. And that's a theological position for me. It's less,
right. I mean,
I've from my philosophical studies.
That,
yeah.
And Richard, what about you?
I would say we have the capacity to do both. And it depends on how you, and a lot of your conditions in life have a lot to do with how your zealotry wiring and cooperation wiring and self-interest wiring start off. But the more work you do with that, the better you can be, especially if you're in a community that values human life and values open-mindedness. That can really have a big influence. I would say we have a capacity for both. And I would say a lot of Christians say we have a capacity for both. Whenever you do good, it's because you're an image bearer of God. And when you do bad, it's because of sin and you've inherited that. So it's just that I don't think we inherited good and bad. We inherited zealotry, cooperation, and selfishness. And then we fill that up with content. And some of it is unconscious and some of it is by our conditions that we're surrounded by. And then some of it is neurons. A lot of the decisions we make have to do not only with the chemicals that one neuron in your brain shoots to the next neuron, but how the receptors in the other neuron are designed. And the decisions that you make can affect those neurons. So, and we can, this is a longer conversation, but a lot of that's unconscious. A lot of that is things that just happen. And it's not like you're trying to shape your neurons. It's just what happens. But based on all that, I can say it could go either way. And whether someone bends towards being how we would perceive evil or bends towards how we would perceive as good depends on their conditions, some genetic, some surrounding conditions, and then some decisions that they make. But even those decisions might be heavily influenced by their conditions.
So I have a question about that. Do you think that a lot of our thoughts and beliefs can be boiled down to the firing of neurons and these kind of chemical reactions taking place in our brain?
Yes, but like a system of neurons. I do think that our decisions and our perceptions are a result of not only the system of neurons firing different chemicals in various systems, but also how we perceive that. But even our perception is,
so it gets input from outside that we apprehend through our sense experiences that affects the neurons. But ultimately, this is a chemical.
Along with the genetics that we inherit. So even our perception of what's going on outside is part of it. But then the genetic material that we use to perceive things is genetic. So it's inside of us, but it's a lot of it's unconscious. A lot of it's outside of our awareness.
So how does that sit with your view that we are free creatures? Because it seems like if you had total knowledge of all these variables, the chemistry happening in your brain and even working through your senses and what kind of stimulus would be put in from the external world, couldn't we perfectly predict what you think and do?
Yeah, I don't think or if we can, it would take like a machine to do it. I don't think humans can do it. And I don't know that it's possible. There's another book. I'm glad I brought my books. A series of
your house. Aren't you at your house?
Yeah, but I have like a huge library and
gotcha. Okay.
But I brought the books that I thought might come up. This is not the Sean Carroll that we all know and love. This is a different Sean Carroll.
Do we all know and love that Sean Carroll though?
Yeah.
I like
Continue.
I like Sean Carroll. I think he's dead
fine.
wrong on stuff, but
yeah. Okay.
I like how he presents himself.
What's the title though? Because most people are going to be listening, not watching.
Okay, it's called A Series of Fortunate Events, and it's a different Sean Carroll. He goes by Sean B. Carroll, but he's saying that it's so chaotic that probably even machines can't predict what's going to happen because there's so much chaotic stuff going into it.
That's funny because that's what the other Sean Carroll says also.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another book that I want to talk about is Behave, and I've lost the cover. I've read this so many times, but Robert Sapolsky. And he was just saying he doesn't know what the mechanism for free will would be. And I kind of agree with him. I think just like ontological truth and objective morality, it might be a perception that we have about ourselves and part of the narrative that we tell ourselves that we can just remove our biases and just analyze what's happening and pick what we think is rationally the best one. But all that might be us fooling ourselves. And I worry that, and I'm not saying this like we don't have free will, so stop talking about it. I wish that we did, and I worry that we don't.
I wouldn't be able to.
And I don't hate people who think that we do, and I behave as if I do, because here's the thing about that train track. If I don't get off the train track, the train's going to hit me. So whether I choose to do it or whether chemicals make me do it, I just don't want to be on the train track. And so I don't worry too much about whether it's free will or, I was predetermined to get off the train track. I just don't want to be on the train track.
It seems to me there's something sort of sad or haunting as I hear you talk about this idea. And I'm not trying to get into determinism versus free will. We did a whole other podcast on that, but just this idea that so much is determined by either the conditioning of the culture we grew up in, our family and that kind of thing, and the way that our neurons are firing such that we don't really make choices for good or evil, which we're going to get into on in kind of our last question. It seems kind of sad to me. Like, why try to do what is good? Because my natural bent, I mean, you talked about the three systems. It seems to me, though, like most people have the system of self-interest front and center all the time. And even that makes them maybe be cooperative, but for their own self-interest, or be zealous for their own self-interest.
Right.
And if that's all there is, I don't know, that makes me feel sort of like, womp, womp,
It makes me feel that. It makes me feel that way. So it's like one of those
Stop
things.
depressing me, Richard. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and sometimes I think, well, I wish it was a lot more simple than what I'm thinking it is. That is sort of a trial and error that doesn't have a conscious me or a unbiased planner looking out for us.
I have great news for you.
Yeah, I know. But
this is the part of the program where we get a gospel presentation.
No, it's the part where Richard actually converts live on air. Right. Can you imagine the ratings? Stop.
So like I don't recommend my way of thinking. I don't tell people, hey, embrace the chaos. I say this is troubling, but this is what I think it is. It's sort of like a blind trial and error. And those of us who are still here get to keep talking about it. And part of that is the first thing we tell ourselves is, I'm here because I'm supposed to be and because of the right decisions that I made, which might be us fooling ourselves.
I think that certainly is us fooling ourselves, but that you used that phrase earlier, and I'm not sure that I agreed then. I think it was Sean Carroll the Sean Carroll that I know that said this, but I might be getting this quote wrong, but he said, ultimately when it was boiled down, he was kind of pressed on this. He said, no, we don't actually have free will, but the variables are so fantastic that, you could no conceivable supercomputer could ever perfectly predict our actions. So it makes sense to live as if we do have free will. And so that he's kind of like the Jordan Peterson of this question. He's going to live as if it's true because of the utility. But as I thought about that and I sat with it, I was like, I'm not even sure that makes sense. I'm not just saying that you believe in free will, because you're saying that I'm making the choice to live as if it's true. But that presupposes that you can do such a thing.
And clearly not choose the wine in front of you.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm presupposing that I have free will, knowing that I could be fooling myself, but I'm not on the train track. So I'm like,
right.
I'm okay with it.
We're really close on this, because again, it's like, I place this belief alongside, it's as foundational as I believe that I exist. Right. And I believe that other minds exist besides my own. Not quite as important or as powerful, but existing.
He said it. He said it after all.
He looked right at me when he said that. If you're listening on the podcast, I feel oppressed. Come save me.
I'm teasing.
Here, I want to move us on because we have this question. I have it in bold that they both knew this question was coming. And it was actually suggested by Richard, since he works with counterterrorism. That we're going to do a little thought experiment, which is, what would it take to turn me, Sarah Stone, evil? Which maybe some people out there listening are like, she's there now. But assuming that I'm not, and I'm using myself just because I'm the moderator here. I'm not sort of the guests that are on the air, but somebody, maybe me. What would it take to turn me evil if you were going to radicalize me? Richard, do you want to start us off?
What do you think, Taylor? Who do you want to go first?
Well, I've got a list. I can do it alphabetical
no.
I'm teasing.
Of how I'm already evil.
Why don't you go ahead, Richard?
Okay. First of all, I just want to say that when you talk about people doing bad things, a lot of times it's mental, disease. So not everybody who does something bad is trying to be evil. And then in a lot of cases, it's apathy. Someone's just really upset and just doesn't really think there's any point. And so they just kind of want to share their misery. So outside of that, just talking about people who are like, I'm going to attack this place where innocent people are because I want to make innocent people suffer in the name of my thing. Just talking about them. The way to radicalize people into wanting to do that is to make it so that their zealotry wiring thinks that the thing that's up here, the thing that they have to dedicate their life to the exclusion of everything else, is a very exclusive concept that everybody has to agree with that. And if they don't agree with it, they're not even a person. They're an impurity. They're a virus, and they need to be eliminated. And that's usually a long journey. It usually takes somebody a long time to get to that point. But you start off by saying like, hey, isn't this important? Don't you agree that this is important? And you try to find something that they think, you try to find what they have right here. And then you try to tie your thing to that. And then you hopefully just keep trying to get them to push it. And so your thing is there. And then when they start talking about, well, other people have different conditions and, they have, their neurons are firing differently, so I don't hate them. You try to get them to see that that's actually weakness, and that, a real strong person would understand that they're part of the problem because they're enabling this, this other, what the radicalizer and the person he's trying to radicalize, he wants them to see that as evil. Is epistemically and morally an enemy to what's epistemically and morally ontologically true. So I would try to get you to find something that is so important that you start to hate. The sad thing about radicalization is that the first part is good. The first part of radicalization is that you find something that's important and you organize your life and you present yourself more.
Well, I'm already halfway there. Like, I think Jesus is really important, and I've structured my whole life around that.
Right. So everyone who's taken that step, I love it. But then the second step is where it gets dark, which is you start to hate and dehumanize people who don't do that. And so then I would try to tell you that that's not weakness. That's actually a good thing. That's actually part of this.
I have to pause you because I have a question. Assuming that my sort of the way someone could radicalize me is through my belief in Jesus. Yeah. If I really think that's true, though, then people that don't think it's true, I can't imagine thinking that they're evil. I want to help them by giving them the same good thing I have found. Right.
Then I would tell you that
it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, I would tell you that desire that you have to help them is actually weakness, and that you're actually enabling their, you're enabling their evil because you're having sympathy for these horrible things. And, imagine how angry the authority of this thing is going to be at you because you don't see it correctly. And this is what, especially with ISIS.
This is why you have to know your Bible, Christians.
It's just so fascinating to me. Continue though.
And this is a lot of how ISIS radicalizers will do that, because there is something in Islamic theology. It's not in the Quran, but it's one of the hadiths that says that if you really love God, love your fellow man. ISIS will just attack that and say there's only a few select people there's only a few select fellow men that you love. Everybody else you need to get rid of them so that we can have this community where we all believe in ISIS, and then those fellow men is who you love if you love God. And so the sympathy that you have for other people, I would say, if I was radicalizing you, I would say that's actually weakness in disguise. That's the devil, tricking you into thinking that you're doing the right thing, but you need to start hating them, and you need to start wanting to get rid of them. And then if I can get you to believe that, then pretty soon you're looking for ways to, and then you start to think that it's epistemically and morally perfect to do it. Then you start looking for ways to do it. In the same way Taylor and I might want to read a book and sharpen our skills, you'll be thinking, how can I kill other Christians who don't agree with me on this aspect of Christianity?
Oh, I'm already there.
They're more dangerous than
I'm joking. No.
So I couldn't get you to do something horrible tomorrow, but maybe over the years, if I was really gifted at manipulating you and getting you to, the biggest trick is getting people to manipulate themselves, where they do their own research and they change their neurons themselves. They would take many years, and it would take a lot of luck and a lot of skills, and then maybe a lot of things that you haven't thought about. In order for that
scary. Scary to think that people could be turned like that.
Yeah,
I like to think I'm protected by the blood of Jesus, but continue, Taylor.
Well, I just wanted to start by responding to what I heard there, because again, I agree, and not that my agreement means much because you're an expert in this field. I wouldn't think about doubting you about how this happens with your experience and your education. Mm-hmm. But I would want to point out that if someone was to radicalize a Christian, and indeed this happens, I think we have to admit that Christians get radicalized into all kinds of terrible things that we would condemn as evil. Yeah. But that's an illogical outworking of Christianity. If you know and understand the person of Jesus Christ, there is no straight line of logical inference that leads to doing things that we call evil. There is, however, a straight line from Christianity to loving people, helping the poor, self-sacrifice, just the kind of passion that just doesn't make any earthly sense. And I think that that's really moving when it happens and when we see it. And I do think that there is a logical outworking from all kinds of secular ideas and secular worldviews. It may be the case, it obviously is the case, that, not all atheists do bad things. And as a matter of fact, well, I mean, we all do bad things, but not all atheists are bad people, certainly not compared to Christians. Oftentimes, I think that is a favorable comparison for them, which is to our shame as Christians, not upholding this standard that we have. But I think I could make a logical line of inference from atheism to doing evil, because you eliminate
not certain the people, but the concept.
Yes, okay. That's right. That's right. And so I think that that's one advantage that the Christian perspective has. That it gives you. As far as the question, what would turn Sarah evil? Nothing. You're already evil. No, don't say that as a joke.
No, he's getting into Romans there.
Yeah, that's kind of a theological sidebar. If we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, then, and your sin is against an infinite God, that's bad news. It puts you in a tight spot.
It's in a pickle.
Yeah.
I'm in a little bit of a pickle.
Right. Yeah. And then of course the good news is that if Christianity is true, then the ultimate self-existent, timeless super intellect behind the universe, who is the standard of moral perfection, he knows you and loves you and has already made a way to wipe out all of your past transgressions. And so I think that that's something that we don't do a good enough job at putting in the front.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, we are out of time. And I know we could just go on and on. You guys can nerd out off air sometime, but just, do you have any final words that you wanted to get in that you didn't, and you wanted, my one last thing I had to say was,
it's the idea that human life has objective value. I love that. And if it's ontologically true, great. And if you're fooling yourself, go with it anyway. I love that. And there's another philosopher out there named Cameron Harwick, Harwick. He has an article that he just put out about, if someone has a meaning system that they value, we should respect that, except for ISIS. Obviously, people like ISIS, not. But if someone has a belief system where they think human life has value, whether it's logically consistent or not, treat them respectfully, because that's a great concept. Whether we're all fooling ourselves or whether it's the truth, that's another reference that I wanted to throw out there for people. And he's not a believer, but he absolutely does believe in that. And I think that's just a great standard for us to have, whether it makes sense for atheism or not. It's a great standard for us.
Yeah. And, I think maybe I don't want to speak for Taylor because he might not agree with us, but I think he probably does. I think for some of us Christians, there is some sweet spot that we try to find, which is being respectful and kind and valuing somebody else, their intellect and how they arrived at the worldview. And also, if we believe we have kind of the medicine for the sickness, like Taylor was talking about, the answer to the bad news, if we think we have that, then we also have this responsibility and duty and privilege of giving that medicine away. And so there's this strange place of respecting someone's worldview and also saying, I would love to also have you consider this medicine that I have found that I think would help you too. And that's such a hard place, but yeah.
Well, I agree with both of you. I think that if they have that idea that human beings have innate value, which almost all of us do, then that's something to work with. I can build on that.
To radicalize I'm joking.
No, to lovingly and gently kind of share with them what I think is the truth.
Yeah.
But I do have one kind of nitpick, I guess. And that is, I would say it's only a great idea if it's true. If it's not true that human beings have innate value, well, then it might be very convenient for us to believe that, because again, it's helpful in perpetuating our species. I certainly don't want to be treated as if I don't have value. Yeah. But when I say great, it's hard for my mind to separate that word from the moral content that I think we put behind it. And of course, I think that if God doesn't exist, then it's a vacuous term.
Well,
I would say if it's not true, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Keep me in the dark.
Right. Certainly.
From my point of view.
Yeah. Well, Richard, if people want to ask you more about all this kind of stuff, and they may, because it's fascinating, where can people find you? Oh, I already said at the beginning, but say it again.
Yeah, on the Faithiest Atheist on Facebook, and then Richard Suttles. I'm on your friend page. I don't know if I'm on Taylor's friend page, but I'll reach out to you, and you can talk to me there.
So Facebook is kind of your go-to place to have these kind of chats. And
yes, I'm old.
Now, I know my daughter tells me all the time, only old people are on Facebook. I'm like, well, I only want to be with old people. Then I guess I don't know.
Can we not share it to Insta?
Can we? Oh, you could share Insta, yeah, okay. Or Twitter or whatever. Yeah. What about you, Taylor? How can people find you and tell you where they think you were right or wrong about today?
Well, I'm on Facebook also. You can also go to searchnational.org. That's our website. You can go to neilology.com. That's my blog. But the best way to get in touch with me, and by the way, if you're just somebody that's listening, and especially if you're in the Houston area and these kinds of conversations interest you and you just want to sit with somebody and who will talk and listen.
That's Taylor.
Right.
Yeah.
Email me. My email address is tneil@searchnational.org. That's TNEILL@searchnational.org.
We'll put it in the show notes. So, okay. Well, thank you guys for doing this. And I say thank you, but you just kind of did what you normally do, I think. So anyway, thanks for doing what you normally do, but here, and for all of our listeners, come back and join us next time. But until then, we encourage you as always to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.